Hello, listener. It's time to dive into the Juniverse, where tales of infidelity, betrayal, and heart-wrenching confessions pull you into the vast unknown.
In the quiet, seemingly idyllic corner of our suburban neighborhood, where every lawn was neatly manicured and the hum of daily life was interrupted only by the occasional dog bark. I thought I had it all. My life with Rachel seemed like the epitome of success, a young couple in love, carving out a future together. Our two-story home stood proudly at the end of the street, a symbol of everything we had worked for. Inside, we had our golden retriever, Max, a friendly companion who seemed to mirror our happiness. Our life was picture perfect, and everyone who looked at us saw what they wanted to see. But as I sat in the stillness of our home, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background, I realized I had been living a lie. There was a darkness lurking beneath the polished surface, a subtle erosion of something I couldn't yet name. Rachel, my wife, was a woman who had always craved attention. From the outside, she was everything anyone could want: charming, beautiful, and confident. But as the years passed, I started to see a different side. At first, I wrote it off as harmless. After all, who didn't want to feel special? Who didn't want the world to notice them? But soon, I discovered that it wasn't just a desire for recognition, it was an insatiable need for validation. One that only grew with time. Everything, no matter how small, became a contest. If I had a difficult day at work, Rachel would somehow manage to turn it around to make it about her. "Oh, you're stressed? Well, I've been dealing with my own problems, and no one seems to care," she would say, her voice sharp, her eyes never quite meeting mine. She had a way of making my challenges seem insignificant, as if my struggles were just another inconvenience in her perfect world. If I accomplished something, no matter how big or small, Rachel would find a way to shift the focus back onto herself. I'll never forget the time I received a major promotion at work. I was walking on air, thrilled that my hard work had paid off. But as soon as I told her, her eyes barely flickered with interest. Instead, she launched into a tirade about how underappreciated she felt in her job, as though my success was an affront to her own. It was as if she couldn't stand the idea of me shining without her being the center of attention. I tried to justify it, telling myself that everyone has their quirks. I figured she'd grow out of it, that eventually, she'd realize how selfish and draining it was to make everything about her. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, but the cracks grew wider and the years passed. Rachel didn't change. In fact, she only became more entrenched in her need for constant validation. I remember the first time I truly noticed how isolated I had become in our relationship. We were at a dinner party at some mutual friend's house, and Rachel was, of course, the life of the party. She captivated everyone with her stories and laughter, but as the night wore on, I realized that I was nothing more than a ghost in the background. I had faded into the walls of our own life, and Rachel didn't even seem to notice. She was so absorbed in herself that she failed to see how I was slowly disappearing. That night, after we got home, I tried to talk to her, to make her see how distant I felt. But Rachel dismissed it with a laugh, saying, "You're just being dramatic. You know I love you." But I didn't feel loved. I felt invisible, like I was merely an accessory in her life, not a partner. I told myself it was a phase, that this would pass. It had to, right? But as the years turned into more years, and the seasons changed, Rachel didn't change. She didn't grow up or learn to put anyone else's needs above her own. Instead, she became more demanding, more self-centered, and undeniably toxic. I was tired of feeling like I didn't matter, tired of feeling like I was constantly giving more than I was getting. But I stayed. I stayed because I believed in the love we once shared, and because deep down, I thought maybe, just maybe, things could be different. But even as I clung to this hope, the cracks in our relationship widened, and I couldn't ignore them any longer. The first shift in our relationship was subtle, just a change in routine, something that I initially chalked up to a harmless new hobby. Rachel had always been conscious of her appearance. But one day she announced that she was going to start going to the gym. "I'm not getting any younger," she said with a teasing smile, looking at herself in the mirror, tugging at the waistband of her leggings. "I want to stay fit, not just for me, but for us." I supported her, of course. I didn't have the time or energy to keep up with a gym regimen myself, but I could see how important it was to her. So I did what any supportive husband would do. I bought her a sleek, new gym bag, a set of high-end workout clothes. and even a pair of fancy sneakers to match. I encouraged her, cheered her on when she'd talk about her new fitness goals, and silently convinced myself that this was a positive change. But I had no idea what I had just walked into. What I thought was a simple step towards healthier living was, in fact, the beginning of a transformation far darker than I could ever have imagined. Rachel quickly became obsessed. What started as her desire to get in better shape soon morphed into an all-consuming need for attention. The gym, once a place for her to work on her body, became a place for her to recreate herself physically and emotionally. She spent hours there, not for fitness but for validation. When she came home, her eyes were always wide, her smile always brighter, and there was an almost manic energy to her. But it wasn't just the workouts. No, it was the way she dressed now. The clothes she wore to the gym became tighter, more revealing. It wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about showing off. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, she was getting fitter, more toned. It was harmless, right? It was when I started noticing the way she spent extra time in front of the mirror before a trip to the gym, carefully applying makeup and checking her reflection over and over again, that my stomach sank. The gym was no longer a place for exercise. It was a stage, and Rachel was the performer. Her appearance had become everything. I didn't say anything at first. It wasn't my place to tell her how to live her life, right? But deep down, I knew. I knew that something wasn't right. Then came the late-night texting. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Rachel always had her phone glued to her hand, scrolling through social media, texting her friends, or watching videos. That was her thing, right? I didn't think much of it. But then the laughter started, late at night, long after we had gone to bed. She'd lie next to me, her back turned, typing away on her phone, giggling softly to herself. It seemed innocent enough at first, until she stopped showing me what she was laughing at. The first time it happened, I shrugged it off. She had every right to enjoy a meme or a funny video. But when it became a nightly ritual, when I saw the way her face would light up in the darkness of the room, I couldn't ignore it anymore. She started hiding her phone from me, turning it away or slipping it under the blanket when I would glance over. I tried to tell myself that maybe I was overreacting, that maybe she just wanted some private space for herself. But in my gut, I felt something shift. One night, the silence between us in bed became too much. I couldn't stand it anymore. I rolled over, the sound of her typing faint in the background, and asked her, "Who are you texting so late? You're always laughing, but you never show me what's so funny." Her reaction was immediate, exaggerated. She flinched as though I had slapped her, her body tensing as she pulled the phone closer to her chest. "It's just a group chat. Relax," she muttered, trying to sound nonchalant. But her voice wavered, her words coming out too quickly, too rehearsed. "Let me see," I insisted, my voice sharper than I intended. "Just show me. What's so funny?" Her eyes widened in panic, and for the first time, I saw the real fear in her expression. "Stop being paranoid. It's nothing." But I wasn't letting it go. There was something in her eyes that screamed guilt. I could feel the walls closing in, the tension building between us. "I'm serious, Rachel. Show me what you're hiding." The phone stayed firmly pressed against her chest as she pulled away from me, her breath quickening. She was defensive, agitated, too defensive for something as trivial as a joke in a group chat. "I'm not doing this right now," she snapped, the tone sharp and defensive. "Can you just leave it alone? I'm tired." I could feel my anger simmering. The silence stretched on, thick with unspoken truths. "No, Rachel. I want to see who you're talking to." Her lips quivered, and her fingers fumbled with the phone. She was on the edge, her voice trembled as she muttered, "It's just stupid stuff. Can we please go to sleep now?" But I wasn't going to let it go this time. My patience had run out. "No, you'll show me now, or this relationship is over." The words came out before I could stop them, and the finality of them hit like a slap. Rachel froze. The air in the room seemed to thicken, each second stretching longer than the last. She looked at me, her eyes wide with shock, her breath catching in her throat. Then she did something I wasn't prepared for. She started to cry, quietly at first, but soon the sobs began to rack her body, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone tighter. "Please," she whispered through the tears. "I'm sorry. I just didn't want you to find out like this." And in that moment, everything changed. The night had been a whirlwind of emotions, Rachel's frantic tears, her awkwardly rehearsed excuses, and that nagging feeling deep within me that something wasn't right. I had always trusted her, always believed in the sanctity of our marriage, but as she lay beside me, her breathing slow and shallow, the weight of suspicion pressed down on my chest. I couldn't shake it. The unease gnawed at me, louder than her apologies, louder than her promises to change. I knew I had to find the truth. I couldn't sleep until I had answers, the real answers. When Rachel was finally asleep, her chest rising and falling in a rhythmic, almost peaceful pattern, I slid out of bed quietly, careful not to wake her. The phone, her prized possession, the one she kept so close, the one she guarded so fiercely, was lying there beside her. I didn't want to invade her privacy, but I didn't have any other choice. My hands were shaking as I reached for it, the cold screen lighting up as I unlocked it with the passcode I had once known by heart. The messages hit me like a punch to the gut. The casual exchanges at first seemed innocent, just gym updates, workout tips from a man named Ethan, someone I had never heard of before. But as I scrolled deeper, the tone began to shift. There was flirtation, subtle at first, but it escalated. Compliments about her looks, questions about what she was wearing to the gym, playful remarks that bordered on inappropriate. And then, as the messages continued, the lines blurred completely. The flirtation turned to open longing, to confessions that made my stomach turn. They had met outside of the gym. They'd gone for coffee. He'd given her personal compliments about how her body had changed since she'd started working out. My heart pounded in my chest as I read the messages, each one a dagger. It was clear now, this wasn't just a harmless friendship. This was an affair. A full-blown, physical affair. I could feel the bile rising in my throat as I saw the details of their meetings. How they'd exchanged not only messages but pictures, intimate pictures, moments that should have been reserved for a husband and wife. I couldn't stay quiet any longer. I walked back into the bedroom, her phone still in my hands, and stood over her as she slept. The sight of her, so calm, so innocent in her sleep, made my blood boil. She had lied to me, betrayed me in the most intimate way possible, and she was still oblivious to the truth that had already unfolded in my hands. Rachel stirred as I shook her awake. Her eyes opened, disoriented, her voice still thick with sleep. "What's wrong?" she murmured, her lips curling into that same familiar, too-fake smile. But I wasn't fooled anymore. "Who is Ethan?" I asked, my voice cold, controlled. My grip on her phone tightened, the screen reflecting in her wide, panic-stricken eyes. Her face drained of color. She didn't even try to deny it. I can explain," she stammered. Sitting up in bed now, her hands fidgeting with the sheets. The sudden vulnerability in her voice made my skin crawl. "Explain? Go ahead," I said, my voice dangerously low. "Tell me how a friendly gym partner turned into this." I tossed the phone down in front of her, letting the reality of it all sink in. Her eyes locked onto the screen, and I watched the mask of calm begin to slip. Rachel swallowed hard, her eyes flickering between the phone and me. "It's not what you think," she began, her voice quivering. But she wasn't fooling me. The words she was about to say were already rehearsed in her mind, and I could see it in the way she avoided looking at me. She was trying to formulate a story that would make her seem less guilty. But it was too late for that. She took a deep breath and then, almost reluctantly, confessed. "Ethan, he was just someone I met at the gym. At first, it was just advice, workout tips. But then, it turned into more. He paid attention to me, listened to me. You never did. You were always so distant, too busy with work, too tired. I needed someone to make me feel seen, to make me feel special." Her words hit me like a slap, the sharpness of her admission cutting deeper than any of the lies she'd told before. "So, you decided to sleep with him?" "Because I wasn't paying attention to you," I said, my voice cold and biting. Rachel's lips trembled, and she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to stifle her tears. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It did. I'm sorry, okay? I never wanted to hurt you. It was just a mistake. But you weren't there for me. You never were." I stared at her, unable to comprehend the audacity of her words. She was turning it around on me, blaming me for her actions. This wasn't just an affair. This was her trying to manipulate the situation, making herself the victim in a twisted narrative she had created in her mind. "You're sorry?" I asked, my voice colder than I thought it could be. "Sorry for what? For betraying me? For sleeping with him behind my back?" I paused, letting her words hang in the air. "No, Rachel, you're not sorry. You're sorry you got caught." Her face contorted with frustration. And she tried to justify herself. You don't understand. I needed someone to show me affection, to care about me. Ethan did that. You didn't. You were always so focused on yourself, on work, on everything else. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. This is what you've reduced us to? You think I didn't care about you? You think I didn't notice the way you changed, the way you pulled away? I was here, Rachel. I was right here. But you chose him. You chose to betray everything we built together. There was no sympathy in my voice, no empathy for her tears. She had broken everything, trust, love, the very foundation of our relationship. And now, she was trying to paint me as the villain in her story. I could barely stand to look at her anymore. I didn't want to hear any more of her excuses. I knew what had happened, and I knew what I had to do next. The days following my confrontation with Rachel felt like I was drowning in a storm of emotions, anger, betrayal, confusion, and a deep sense of loss. I left our home without a word to her, unable to stomach the thought of sharing space with the woman who had torn my heart apart. My brother, who had always been my rock, opened his door to me without hesitation, offering me a refuge in his quiet, sparsely furnished apartment. But no matter where I went, Rachel's calls and messages followed me like a shadow I couldn't escape. At first, her voice was full of desperation. She left voicemail after voicemail, repeating how sorry she was, how she regretted everything, and how she had made a huge mistake. The words she spoke sounded rehearsed, like a script she had been reading in her mind for days, but they did nothing to soothe the gnawing pain in my chest. I wanted to believe her, but the truth was too clear. I couldn't trust her anymore. As the days passed, her attempts to manipulate the situation grew more frantic. She began calling our mutual friends and family, painting me as the villain. He just left me, she said, her voice quivering with false hurt. He didn't even give me a chance to explain. He just abandoned me. She twisted the narrative, spinning lies that I had shut her out, that I had neglected her, that I had never truly cared. It was as if the betrayal she had inflicted on me was somehow my fault. I knew I couldn't let her get away with this. I couldn't let her control the story. So I took action. I gathered the evidence, the screenshots of her incriminating messages with Ethan, the photos, the intimate texts, everything she thought she could hide. I shared it with everyone she had reached out to. I made sure our friends and family saw the truth. Rachel's carefully constructed image of the perfect wife, the charming, beloved woman everyone adored, crumbled before their eyes. They began to see her for who she truly was, a deceitful woman who had betrayed the trust of the man who had loved her with everything. Her calls and messages continued. But they were different now, angry, bitter, demanding. But I was done. The woman I once knew was gone, replaced by a stranger who cared more about her image than the person she had hurt the most. I filed for divorce, and the papers sat in front of me, a painful reminder of everything Rachel had taken from me. I drove back to our old house to deliver them. When Rachel wasn't home, I left the divorce papers on the kitchen counter. She would come home to find our marriage over. Soon after, she called, desperate. We can fix this, she begged. Please, we need to talk. But I wasn't interested in more lies. Come clean, Rachel. Tell me everything. I demanded. She hesitated, then admitted the truth. Ethan started it. I didn't mean for it to happen, but he gave me the attention I needed. I could hear the lies, but it didn't matter anymore. I blocked her number, walked away, and never looked back. The woman I once loved was a stranger. And I was done. Epilogue, the aftermath. Rachel's reputation crumbled. Once the golden girl of our town, she became the subject of whispers and judgment. Her attempts to play the victim fell flat as the truth spread. As for me, it took time to heal, but I moved on. The illusion of a perfect marriage had shattered, and I learned an invaluable lesson. Never ignore the red flags. I was better off without her. Thank you for listening. If you were in the main character's shoes, what would you do? At what point did you realize the betrayal? Was it the late-night texts, the sudden change in behavior, or the confrontation with the truth? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.